Absolutely. I mean, there are a number of things. I mean, we don't think we're going to use Beaver Stadium 40 times a year, but there are certainly some things. We've talked about international soccer. Obviously, we're doing a concert, and we've talked to the NHL folks about doing either the Stadium Series or the Winter Classic. So that would be something we'd be very interested in. Yeah, we don't. We have some order of magnitude stuff that, because of the nature of that, we're not willing to share. We've got to actually design and get really good cost estimates on this. But the $125 million is what we've put in this next fundraising campaign, and it's also part of what we're testing right now with our feasibility.
Folks. Sandy.
Is that what he said? Sorry. It was 120. I'll correct that. For the record, it's 120. Did I say? I didn't even know I did that. Sorry.
Would there be potential for the stadium project to begin earlier than 5 years if you guys were to raise money past the 120 million, to clarify?
Again, I think we're looking at, along with those actually designing, funding, and constructing those 5 projects, we're talking about the lead up to Beaver Stadium within that period.
If the stadium's going to be done in stages, which was what, Phil, I think you indicated, similar to Texas A&M, why is it not possible to start that earlier? Obviously, fans are really, wondering what's going on with the stadium, but why couldn't you implement one of those phases as part of the initial 5-phase thing?
Because to figure out what phase 1 is, you have to design the entire thing. Based on the complexity, and Phil and Mark both may have some additional comments here, but based on the complexity, we think there's a significant amount of time investment in designing, doing actual design, sequencing, and the funding model.
If you take a look at what Texas A&M did with their sequencing, they did it in consecutive years. One of the things we want to make sure that we're prepared to do is do that in consecutive years. And so there's as little impact to our fans as possible. And so before we do anything with Beaver Stadium, we need to make sure that we've got that set both to be financed and to be designed and constructed in the consecutive years. And I'll say the 5 projects we've identified are not small projects, and so it's going to take an enormous effort on our behalf to pay attention to those 5 projects, and that'll be our focus for the next 5 years.
2 things. The student section, will that be moved or impacted at all at Beaver Stadium? And from a basketball standpoint, you guys have some renderings of what Beaver Stadium will look like, but with regards to the BJC, all we really heard were improvements for the atmosphere. Can you offer any kind of specifics about what can be done to improve the atmosphere, seats closer, get rid of some of the cavernous feel, or are there any specifics that you can offer at this point?
Yeah, I mean, it's making it a more intimate basketball specific environment.
We do not have any renderings from an interior perspective of renovations for the Bryce Jordan Center. But as you mentioned, some of the things that would make that a more intimate feel would be bringing seats closer to the court, particularly behind the baskets. If there's a way for us to do that, you take a look at where we were this last weekend in Washington, D.C. This last week in Washington, D.C., that too had been built for multi-purpose. There are ways to configure some of the seating behind the baskets to make it a little bit more intimate feel. And so we'll work with our partners in the Bryce Jordan Center to see if some of those things are possible. We don't have any answers right now,
though. Sandy, when we look back at your time at Cal, there was a large deficit that was left. We're saying it's going to take over 100 years to pay off. What are some of the things that you learned from your time at Cal, and what's going to be different with this athletic plan?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to understand the context at Cal, which was that the football stadium sat on a fault, and that the regents told the university that they had to move out of the stadium if it was not renovated. 70% of the total cost of that was the seismic upgrade. But I think the overall picture is about debt and being very, very prudent about how you use that. I think that that's something that all of us in intercollegiate athletics today are making sure that we're being really smart about in terms of leveraging our futures.
For the stadium, is there an estimated ratio of chairs versus bleachers? And if so, where are those areas located?
I don't have an estimated ratio of chairs versus bleachers. I can say that we're adding a substantial number of chairs to the stadium. It's what we heard from our fans. One of the amenities that our fans are interested in. There's still a significant number of bleachers. For instance, upper decks in the end zones, I know, stay bleachers. We're contemplating and discussing whether or not the student section should stay bleachers. We do have some time to figure that out, though, right? And so, as Sandy mentioned earlier, these facilities are programmed, they're not fully designed. And when we go to full design, we'll be able to determine exactly where the chairs would be located, where the bleachers would be located. We know that with this configuration, we can seat 103,000.
All right, kind of a minor question, but on the east side of the stadium where it says Pennsylvania State University, is that going to be transferred anywhere in the new design, or is that just going to be kind of nixed?
We don't have an answer to that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
This will be for both Sandy and Phil. Both of you have been to other institutions. Could you speak to where you saw Penn State's facilities when you got here? Because you pretty much sprung into action on this plan. Could you talk about, had these types of projects really not been undertaken for years? Do you think Penn State really was behind in the times for the facilities?
I mean, I think when you're talking about things, I mean, one of the reasons I think we sprung into action so quickly is that when you look at Beaver Stadium in particular, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about some really significant infrastructure needs that stand out from a concession stand, concourse, restroom kind of situation, and those are, I think those are non-negotiables in terms of not, well, do we or don't we? Yeah, we need to address that. We need to address that from a fan standpoint. And if you're going to do that, then maybe look at some of these other amenities that are helping to motivate fans to come to games.
I'd say one of the things that we talked about pretty quickly, and I think we've all observed, is that Penn State has some of the finest facilities in the country. Pagula Ice Arena is one of many, and it has some facilities that need as much attention as others in the country do, and our natatorium is an example of that. And so Mark and his staff, I think, had done a really nice job of identifying opportunities to renovate, opportunities to build. The one thing that I do think that it was missing that we try to do is pull it all together in this master plan. So rather than simply looking at one facility through the lens of that particular facility, the master plan allows us to look through the wide-angle lens and a 20-year roadmap at how these things can fit together. And I think that's why this was so important for us, so we could piece it together over many, many years.
Did Populous come up with more than one mock-up that they presented to you guys? And if so, how did you settle on this one as the one you would present as what Beaver Stadium could look like when this is undertaken?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an iterative process, and talking about all of the things in the program, in the ideal program, in the necessary program, and then there are lots of things in this master plan that have been tweaked, and things that maybe Populous came to us with, and we're like, oh, that doesn't quite fit, or that doesn't fit the needs as we see them.
Phil, getting back to Texas A&M, do the comparisons end with the sequencing similarities that you foresee, or are the renovations and the amenities that be added there similar as well?
Yeah, I'd say right now we've really just looked at how they've sequenced that facility. We haven't looked into detail at what some of the amenities they've added. I can tell you that the exterior of the facility, very similar to this one, was added over time as well. And so when you look at the Kyle Field pre-renovation and post-renovation, they've also added a facade. Very similar to this. They did not have that facade necessarily before the renovation. I'd say that's where the comparison ends for now. It doesn't mean that we won't continue to analyze what some of the things that A&M did that would be comparable here and some of those things that wouldn't be comparable here. I would suspect, I'm looking at Sandy for this, I would suspect that when we actually get into the design of the stadium, not just the master plan of it, we'll visit several facilities to take a look at some of the things that they've done well, some things that we think might fit here. I know when Sandy did her facility at Cal, they did that. When we did the stadium at Minnesota, we did that. I think that's pretty common.
Adding to that conversation about Texas A&M, I'm wondering if conversations have been held with them about, the similar changes and how they went about that, or those conversations with similar schools are still to be held.
I have not had any conversations with Texas A&M about how they went through that. I'll say the architect is the same. So Populous did Texas A&M's facility renovations, and they did our master plan, and I think that was one of the things that led us to understand we could sequence this very similarly to the way. I don't know if Sandy's talked with them at all.
Rec Hall was one of the facilities that I think people from the outside looking at it just assumed that maybe it's been here for a long time, there'd be some kind of upgrades. Were you guys surprised that, nothing major, it seems like, is going to be part of that? Was there an emphasis?
Surprised, that's our decision.
Right.
Yeah.
But
Again, it has to do with all the principles of the master plan, and we certainly didn't want to vacate Rec Hall. That certainly would have been a possibility, but we felt that the history and in the environment in Rec Hall is one that we want to continue to compete in, but that the needs, everyday needs of our student athletes and our programs would be better served by more modern day-to-day facilities.
And same thing, you guys had referenced Pagula briefly. Obviously, right now, I think you guys called it the crown jewel, and everybody would agree with that. How do you kind of factor stuff like that in? Because 20 years down the road, of course, there's going to be different needs that we probably can't even anticipate right now.
Well, and I think that was one of the goals, was to provide enough flexibility to capture that. I think Pagula has set the bar for how Penn State should be doing athletic facilities and what it should be like in terms of a fan experience and fans wanting to come to Pagula, as well as the impacts on our program from a recruiting standpoint and a student athlete success and conditions for success standpoint. So I think actually Pagula Ice Arena has set the bar for what we're going to be doing for the next 20 years.
Sandy, you look at some of the bigger renovations that you mentioned, those all happened around areas that were largely close to large population centers where there is inherently more wealth. Is there a concern from a fundraising standpoint of going out and finding the funds for that sort of renovation, and at the same time, let's say you get to 80% of your goal, are you prioritizing some of these things? They're definitely going to happen. Or is this 100% of the money that you get? Is there something that you're going to do in that in-between area?
Well, that's what some of the feasibility study is going to help us with. The information out of the feasibility study will help us sit down and go, okay, are we, in the past, what Penn State has done is said, okay, X amount or percentage of a project has to be funded through philanthropy, and then there's a contribution from ICA, from capital resources, et cetera. Those are the kinds of things we're going to have to figure out based on the feasibility. I'll tell you this: the passion at Penn State, the numbers that we represent, the community that we represent, and the passion around intercollegiate athletics, I have no doubt in my mind that this community is going to support in many different ways. Again, there are several different ways for us to move forward in this from a funding standpoint, and all of those will add together to us being able to do this.
Sandy, you mentioned earlier discussions, with NHL about stadium series, etc. Has there been any discussions with FIFA officials or MLS representatives when thinking about, the Beaver Stadium renovations?
There have been discussions with international soccer, yeah.
Sandy, I just wanted to clarify just one thing. So the starting of this 5-year plan is starting now. It's already underway.
So the next 5-year capital plan begins in fiscal year 18-19. We're currently operating on the campus capital plan, the current capital plan. That next capital plan doesn't start till 18-19. It doesn't mean that we don't get started now, but these projects are slated for that 5-year capital plan, 18-19 through whatever 5 years from there is.
Well, we're also a year into a fundraising campaign that will include these projects.
Okay. And
So there's overlap there.
Okay. And lastly, what do student athletes have to look forward to in terms of just PSU athletics for the long term, in terms of the indoor athletic facility and things that you guys will be offering them in terms of enhancing their growth as they mature into the athletes that you want them to be?
Well, it's improved facilities with them in mind and their success in mind, and I think the leader there is the center of excellence. But it's also all of these facilities were programmed with them in mind and providing them conditions for success. And so I think whether it's facilities, whether it's the best coaching in the country, whether it's the best sports science and medical care in the country, that's our facilities master plan fits that.
Okay, so I'm just trying to pin down when this whole Beaver Stadium thing is expected to start and finish. So if we're talking, as Phil said, the fiscal year 2018-19.
Yeah, I'll stop you right there, Corey. You're not going to be able to pin it down because that there is no set. It's not.
Could it be 10 years
not
before
in
it's
this
even
first
started?
5 years.
Could it be 10 years
because
before
we
it's even started?
we feel we need that runway to design, sequence, and fund. That's where we are.
Do you have a goal in mind that you'd like to have it done by a certain year?
I don't think until we actually get into design, sequence, and funding mechanisms that we can set a goal.
Will the student fee be raised specifically to cover athletic facilities, and if so, how much could that be?
No, the discussions are with, and we have had one, the discussions are with the student fee board, and that would be strictly around aquatics and tennis. And we would have to go to them with a specific proposal, which we showed them the entire master plan and walked them through specifically those two facilities. And at some later date, when we have more specificity, we will go to them with a proposal that they would vote up or vote down.
When you get into some project of this magnitude, does it mean that you'll be here to see it through to the very end?
The 20 years?
Well, that or half of it. I'm just curious of your long-term vision in terms of being the central figures who help really launch it.
Yeah. Well, for me, this is the fun part. Getting to not only plan, but then start to see come to fruition physical manifestations of your vision. So I'm certainly going to want to be here for a significant part of it.